to appreciate your kind offer of leading us with a karakia just prior to opening our meeting.
Thank you. Just on behalf of Taupō District Council to external members, this is actually a karakia which has been developed for the Taupō District Council. So it gives me great pleasure to be able to say it for the first time. Tuia ki te Māori o te whenua, tuia ki te mana o te tangata, tuia ki te pono te aroha, kia piki, kia ika, kia te tomata, huie, taikie.
Kia ora, thank you, Anna. Welcome along today, everybody, to the Taupō East Rural Community Meeting. Thank you for being here today. I see that Paula has joined us from Wairake Primary. Thank you so much, Paula, for being here with us today. I am kind of flying a bit on the blind as far as the agenda, so excuse me, I'm just getting this to come in. The first thing that we've got there is the minutes from the last meeting. Could I have somebody move that those be accepted?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, just through the chair, could I move His Worship the Mayor's apology firstly?
Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry, Anna, thank you. I was going to that second because I'm running on memory. Yes, if we could. Anna, are you happy to move that we accept that apology?
Absolutely.
And could somebody second that, please?
Yeah, I'll second that.
And is everyone in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. All right, my diligence books is not working. Anyway, I will just carry on. Excuse me for flying blind. Next is the minutes from the last meeting. Could I have somebody move that those be accepted as a true and correct record?
I'll move. Yes.
Moved by John, seconded by Patrick. Thank you very much. Those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. Are there any minutes any matters arising from those minutes? No. Okay. Oh, thanks, Anna. That's brilliant. Next on our agenda is the draft speed management plan. Oh, actually, just before we carry on, can we just adjust the agenda? I think that's the correct way to do things, Shani. We need to take out the customer experience presentation and defer that to the next meeting. Could I have somebody move that we adjust that agenda? Thanks,
yes.
Anna. Patrick, those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. Thank you, team. Right, moving to reports. 4.1, draft speed management plan submission. So we had a submission to go through to that draft management plan around some ideas. Thank you, Patrick, for making yourself available to sign that submission on behalf of our committee. Is there anything anyone would like to discuss in regards to that?
Well, I think Kylie covers the issues that we've raised quite well. It's been well put together. Yes.
Just one note that Mark Wynyard sent through to me, which was something that I wasn't aware of and didn't know about. But in the case of an ambulance, they're allowed to travel up to 20 kilometres an hour above the speed limit in their area. So if that speed limit is reduced to 80 kilometres in a lot of our rural areas, that's going to mean that an ambulance is getting to them a whole lot slower than what they might have seen in the past, and that's a real concern. I don't know whether we can note that in the minutes somehow. I don't quite know what we can do with that, Tracy, but it was kind of an interesting point that Mark raised.
Yeah, Libby may be able to add to this, but it's probably something worth noting in the wider conversation.
Yeah, I think that's maybe where we might go with that.
You know,
are there any other points of conversation or anything else that anyone else would just like to comment on regards to that submission? Okay, we've got the recommendations that the Taupō East Rural Representative Group makes a submission on the draft speed management plan, which includes the following key points. approach to speed limits and the prioritisation, speed limit change within the Wairakei village, and speed limit change to the high-risk rural roads. And do we need to move that one at a time? Shani, can we move?
Madam Chair, you can move it together if you would like.
Okay, I think everyone would be happy that we move the two together. And the second recommendation is that the Taupō East Rural Representative Group delegates authority to its Deputy Chairperson, Patrick Hart, to sign the full submission and lodge it prior to the close of submission. So this is really a formality around that. Could I have somebody move that happen?
I'll move that way.
Yeah, I'll second.
Thank you, Anna. Those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. Excellent. Our second report on our agenda is the community grants presentation. And I'm going to make the assumption that we've got Rose Prisk there just coming online to help us with that. I think this could be of interest to you, Paula. And just to let you know that there is a recording of this meeting as well, so that if the Wairakei school community and wider community would like to come back and revisit this, that could be an appropriate thing to do. Rose, I'll hand over to you if you don't mind.
Kia ora koutou. Community grants. Well, council has a number of community grants. Total, we have $500,000 that goes to our community in a way of community grants and also partnership agreements. The partnership agreements are set through a application process once every 3 years after the long-term plan. And in 2021, that was our first year, and 14 applicants were awarded a total sum of $320,000. So they receive their funds every year for 3 years. And then we have another application process again for that. And then we also have our community sports grants. They have 2 funding rounds a year. There's $40,000 in the pot there. We have community arts grants. There's $30,000 in the pot there. And we also have our social service grants, and that's $100,000, and they have 2 rounds also. Those 3 grants, the sports, the arts, and the social service grants, are district wide. Anyone in the district can apply if that's fits the specific purpose of the grants. Then we have ward-based grants. So Mangakino-Pouakani have $25,000 in their pot, and they run 2 rounds a year. Turangi-Tongariro have 1 round a year, and there's $65,000 in the pot there. And our last long-term plan, councillors decided that there was a gap that wasn't filled. So they have approved and set up a Taupō East Rural Community Grant. So that's for anything that's community-based, benefits the community, could be environmental, could be sporting, but hopefully people would apply to the sports grants. But those types of community projects that don't fit into the sports, arts, social services, and that is $20,000, and it's just 1 round a year. And so this is the new grant for Taupō East Rural Ward, and it opens on Monday next week. All our grants are open for a 4-week period, and the application process is online. You fill out an online application, and then we have a committee distribute those grants. 3 of our committees are external providers. So we have the Sport Advisory Council for our sports, Wairau Community Trust for our social service grants, and Creative Taupō for our arts grants. And then for the ward-based funds, we have the Turangi-Tongariro Community Board for the Turangi grants, Mangakino-Pouakani Representative Group for the Mangakino grants, and we have recently established a combined group for the Taupō East Rural Community Grants. There's also another couple of grants that we also manage, which is a Creative Community Scheme. It's central government funding from Creative New Zealand, and there is about 40,000, I think it's 38,000 something, and that's purely for the arts. Creative Taupō do the distribution on that as well, and we run them alongside the other Creative Taupō grants. There's also the Rural Travel Fund, which is from Sport New Zealand, and that's around $14,700, $15,000 a year. It's for 5 to 19-year-olds, and it is for regular competition travel for sports. Think I've may have covered everything, but any questions, happy to answer any.
I can see Anna Park, Councillor Park's hand going up there. Something to add or question?
Yes, thank you. Two things. Firstly, very well done, Rose. You've explained that brilliantly in your 2 minutes. At this grant, we were really conscious of things like the Taupō Christmas Parade and different things that didn't quite fit being a social or art or a sport. So it gives an avenue for the Taupō East Rural Ward. Anything outside of the box can apply. So I think it's great that we've been able to capture that. The second point was, Rose, and through you, Madam Chair, I'd really appreciate if we could advocate to Sports New Zealand that having had the sport and rec portfolio before, this $15,000 for rural travel has been that amount for as long as I can remember. And with the increase in fuel costs and the amount our Taupō district kids have to travel, I'd love to advocate a letter, and I don't know when the appropriate time of the cycle is for the Taupō Rural Committee to advocate for perhaps an increase in that amount. But I'm just not sure if there's an appropriate consultation process for Sports New Zealand or what the right mechanism might be.
Could I make the suggestion, Anna, if you're happy with this, Tracy, if you and I work together to draft a letter, we bring it to the next meeting of the committee, we put the letter through regardless, Anna, and ask them what the best part of the cycle is, but the fact that we've actually committed to sending a letter prior to elections and things like that, so that there's actually something received there, and then we'll have notification moving forward of what the correct timing might be, but that actually we've expressed that opinion, because I think that's a really appropriate opinion to be shared. I'd
actually like to, through your chair, Madam Chair, is to pass that on to Councillor Taylor, who is our representative on the Waikato Regional Transport Committee, and get it put on the action list for it to be advocated for at regional level as well.
So if we could add both of those things to the agenda for next time, Tracy, if that's okay, and Paula, I just think that they're really good. It's really difficult in the rural sector who quite takes on which role, and I know that it may not be directly our role, but if nobody does any advocating, then there won't be any advocating. So if we're all in agreement, I don't see any harm in putting a letter together supporting the wider rural communities. So yeah, I just think that's great, and I think writing it in a formal sense from our committee is an appropriate place. And Paula, I don't know whether your board wants to do something like that in the background as well, perhaps whether the Board of Trustees might like to put a letter through to those groups when you see the addresses and who they are.
We have applied to the rural grant for the school-based, but not ever been successful in that, partly due to the amount of money that's available and because it's for competition to move our students, and so it generally comes from individuals. That's my experience with it, but I'm happy to put it to the board.
Cool. Thank you.
And I apologise, Madam Chair, for hijacking the item. I mean, this is good news, 20 grand for community good.
Madam Chair, apologies. If I may, sorry, just to support the conversation. as some of you will know, we're looking at actually having more resource within our council team in this funding space going forward. We'd put a role to, Rose has done an amazing job over the last wee while, but as you know, we're boosting our team, and we will have a role who will help community groups, schools across the rohe to look at other funding avenues, because as much as this is a wonderful pot of money, it's part of a suite, I guess, of how we'd like to support people going forward. But even Paula having those conversations around, if you are unsuccessful, how can we help you to be successful to get that money? And it may not be from this particular fund, but it may be from some others where we can use our networks to help with that. So just a bit of a pitch, I guess, going forward, that we will be able to support more. It may take a few months to get there, but yes, as our role going forward, we will be able to be more active in that space. Thank you.
Thanks, Libby. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, we've got a recommendation here, team, that the Taupō East Rural Representative Group receives the presentation on the new Taupō East Rural Community Grant Allocation Committee. Could I have somebody move that, please?
Moved.
Thanks, Patrick. Seconded by John. Those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. Sorry, just jumping back. So we moved to take up 4.3, moving to 4.4. Are we still able to do this, Tracy, the overview of how issues are addressed?
In terms of customer services or addresses? No, just rural addressing.
Oh, sorry, how addresses are issued. Was that going to be dropped down?
No, I can do that one. Okay,
perfect.
Totally fine.
I'll just hand over to Tracy. Just to give some background to this, just before I do hand over Tracy, we tend to suffer a bit of an issue. So just taking one of our addresses as an example, we're at 658 Turangi Road, and if people use their Navman or their Google Maps, they end up 2 k's down the road trying to access the farm, and it's not so much fun when you've got a cow having calving issues and the vet's trying to follow that, sort of talking to you on the phone, operating in a bit of an emergency situation, and then you find out they're 2 k's down the road and you need to send somebody to get them. I'm aware of a farm on Forest Road that needed an ambulance following a quad bike accident and the rapid numbers didn't land where their property was, and just quite a health and safety issue. So I think just back to the previous item that we had on our agenda, it's not essentially our problem as a representative group, but if nobody's representing these issues, then they don't get represented. So hence why they've come to our agenda, in the hope that perhaps we can do some advocacy. But Tracy was going to give us some background on how these things are created, just to give us a little bit of an understanding of the why and how these things get to be. So handing over to you. Thank you, Tracy, for your support on this one.
That's all right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Right. Oh, I need to go back. Okay, so it is part of council's role to look at addressing. So I thought I'd just take you through some of the background as to what addresses are and the roles that we all play and the responsibilities and the likes of how they link to Google, etc. So we all know what an address is, don't we? It's there for mail, emergency services, power, water, all of those types of things. And it actually forms the basis of our voting system as well, and how people are allocated and things like that. So addresses actually comply to a standard, or a number of standards and guidelines, with the main intent of them being consistent, unique, logical, clear, and things like odds on the left, evens on the right. And it even goes so far as talking about how we record that information, how we map it, and the signage. So those are New Zealand, Australian standards. So quite a lot goes into it, particularly when in terms of naming roads, to making sure that when roads are named through the subdivision process, that there's no overlap or consistency. So you don't want a Smith Street and then a Smith Road, because from an emergency services perspective, you imagine someone on the phone, they're just going to ring up and go, oh, I'm at Smith, and they're going to miss that information. So that's what those standards are there for. In terms of rural addresses, as Madam Chair just mentioned, rural addresses take on a slightly different approach. So they are based on the standards and comply with all the standards there that we talked about, but use a different type of allocation. So the rural address property identifier, or RAPID as it's known, is how we number rural properties. So they're based on a distance down the road, and generally that starts from the very start of the road, so the start of Pohepi Road, the start of Broadlands Road, and are based on a kilometre up the road. So if you are 1k up the road, you're number 100 or 101, depending on if you are left or right. So the goal of that is that emergency services should know exactly where you are because they're based on that number. Feel free to ask any questions as I go through. But in terms of responsibilities, so it is actually council's responsibility to allocate, change and issue property numbers and street names. I know it sometimes gets really confusing because you have New Zealand Post in the mix, you have land information in the mix, you have fire and emergency services, but we all actually have very clear and different roles. So council, that sits up within our rating team at the moment. So any changes to address and all of those types of things through a subdivision process go through our system, comply to the standards, and then that information is sent on to LINZ, who we are statutorily obliged to go and give that information to. And from there, that feeds out to a whole lot of other agencies. Plus, we also, just for assistance purposes, we give that to New Zealand Post as well. So land information, their role is actually to manage the standard, so that any council that gives them new addresses, they make sure that it is compliant with the standard. They add it to New Zealand's national record of road names and property numbers, so they manage that sort of authoritative source of address and street naming information. And they also provide that data, as I mentioned, via a data service, which is some IT back-end speak. They feed that out to a whole lot of other agencies to use. Google being one of those, CoreLogic being another. There are a number of agencies, and that's freely available on the web for anyone to go and consume. New Zealand Post obviously maintain the postal address system. Now, you would think that would be the same, but coming from a sort of land information background, I know that's not. We've had quite a few people in the past, I've had them ring up when this role sat in my team and say, my numerologist said I have to be number 153. Sorry, ma'am, you're number 12. So we've had, it's been really interesting. Numbers, streets and numbers are quite personal to people. People don't like to be number 13. So they'll adopt number 15 or they'll adopt number 12A or 11A, to get around that. So what they are legally known as could be number 13. Sometimes on the ground that makes it a little bit different. Or if you're a corner property or a rural property that may have multiple addresses. So they are quite a personal thing. So that's why New Zealand Post maintain the postal address system. So it's easier for their posties to get to it. And land information manage the sort of the legal addresses that you see on titles and all of those type of information. It does seem odd that we do have two, and there was a project, a national project that kicked off a number of years ago that I was a part of, to look at how we actually combine all of that into one massive central repository of postal and physical addresses. But at the time, it was just cost prohibitive to do that work, which is a bit of a shame because it does make it quite difficult for things like fire and emergency. So fire and emergency also play a role. They tend to manage the suburb type of information, which makes up an address as well. So, Hilltop, the Bird area, Taupō East, etc. So they tend to play a role in that part. So just in terms of emergency services don't use Google data. It's not an official repository of information. It's not validated against standards. It just tends to be what they've put in. Where they can, they try and use, like I said, the LINZ data service, but that sometimes is a bit of a hit and miss. What they have done, though, for emergency services is they have put in a system back in about 2017 now, where they actually use your location information from your mobile phone. If you think about the amount of people that have mobile phones, and I think it's over 90% that actually call emergency services now via a mobile phone, they've partnered between MB and emergency services and the mobile network operators to create a system called emergency call location information. So that means that they can actually get your location information automatically from any Android or iOS phone and feed that back to the emergency call centre, which helps them to locate you a little bit easier. Obviously, that's going to be a bit challenging in some of the rural areas when coverage is a bit of an issue, but that was a step forward in trying to help the emergency services get to the right location faster. So that's proved to be quite a positive change in that space. But as I said, Google Maps is great. It's, we're all surrounded by it. It's in our cars, it's in everything, but it's actually not the official source, and it's not used as the primary source for emergency services. It's also, if you look at the data in there, it has aerial photography. So that information, I think, over Taupō is about 1997. So they actually haven't kept up to date with a lot of that. And I can tell you, for love or money, we have tried to give them council's latest aerial photography. We fly every few years to ensure that our community and our organisations have more up-to-date aerial photography, but Google will not take it. They used to just open their checkbook and would just grab as much information as they possibly could. But now they seem to have closed shop. We will have freely available. The information that we fly is actually, for us, we tend to look at it as it's already owned and paid for by our community. So why would we not put it into places that benefit our community, being Google? But yeah, as I said, they just will not take that information from us. So it's a bit of an uphill battle, but we still keep trying. We keep trying. And so we obviously have Google Maps, and I'll take you through a bit of how you can actually change an address or update information within Google Maps. And we also have TDC's Mappy application, which sits on our council website, and that pulls together information from many agencies. From land information, it'll pull through the addresses and the property boundaries, but it also has the aerial photography that council flies and pays for every year. So if you want more up-to-date information, have a look at that. Obviously, that's more of a standalone piece. But in terms of Google, so everybody's seen this. It's pretty familiar to everybody, right? We'll just zoom into, say, an area. Let's find our good old friends at River Road.
I'm not sure if anyone else is following you, Tracy. I'm still on Google Maps on your slideshow, slide 6.
Are you? Okay, let me just, I will stop sharing and try and share another screen. Share this one. Can you see that one?
Brilliant.
Yep.
Google Maps, yep. So we're all familiar with Google Maps, right? We use it on our phones, we use it everywhere. You can actually, if you scroll into an area, you can actually see all the addresses on here and let Google know if they are wrong or add new ones in. So it's quite an easy process. Just by clicking on it, you get the information down the side here, and you can click on Suggest and Edit. So if we said, well, actually, that one's not quite right, that should be 656. You can suggest and edit, and you can say the location's in the wrong place, it is missing some information, or it's the wrong address. And from here, you can add in the new information, and that goes through to Google, and they will approve it or decline it. So that's a really good way if you want to update information in Google. So that's more getting the people, the stuff that's happening on the ground in there. So it's like a crowdsourcing application. That's a great way to do that. And click submit, you'll get an email back in a couple of days that tells you that information has been approved. I will not change somebody's address because that's probably not a great thing to do. So in a nutshell, Google is there to help us it can be a hindrance, but you do have some ability to go in there and change it and to edit things and to tell them where it is wrong, because it is used occasionally, as I mentioned, not as the primary source of emergency services, but it is used at times. And NavMan tend to have their own data set, but also look at other opportunities for information. If you do have any questions or challenges, you can't quite get that working, just sing out to myself or my team. As I mentioned, on the council page, there is mapping, which gives you a link to the mapping application and also an email address to email us, or just through the info@taupo.gov.nz if you do need any help. Any questions?
I'd just like to say that was brilliant, Tracy. I've learned a whole lot today, so thank you.
Yeah.
I think the ripple effects of that will be huge.
Yeah, it is. Certainly, I haven't looked at addresses for a while. I haven't been in my team for a while, but I do have the mapping team within me. So, yeah, this is a passion of mine to make sure our location information and our geospatial information is up to date and correct.
Just through the chair, with my emergency services or emergency management hat on, it has come up a few times, especially with all the growth out at Kinloch. An example being Hitiri Road, and they have all their lovely, big, wonderful coloured mailboxes all clumped together, but they don't actually have the reflective numbers of the houses on their driveways. So I do know that St John's have had a lot of struggles with new developments where they do clump all their mailboxes together. So I'm not sure where the responsibility lies for suggesting little reflective numbers at the end of their driveways for emergency services, but it has definitely come up before. But thank you for that background. I hadn't seen it before.
Oh, that's great. I mean, it used to be something, because obviously as an organisation we do issue the rural numbers. We used to go out and physically drive them to get the right distance. We actually use the mapping software to do that for us now. And at the time we issued numbers and recommendations on what numbers you should put on your mailbox and why you should do them, and for those exact reasons. So it may be something we need to just revisit and perhaps do an update to our community around, did you know?
Cool, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments?
It's interesting.
It is, Patty?
Yeah, real interesting. Yeah, well, if you plug in my address in, you get Dome Valley, Auckland.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah, or you end up in Waitananui. You get two options, and my option, where I actually live, is third option on Google Maps. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting.
I thought you did that on purpose so we couldn't use your pool.
Yeah, what's it? Yeah, that's right. Try and keep everyone away.
Yeah, happy to help if you want to work through it.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that, Tracy, because I think understanding why and how these things are created gives us information that we can share with the wider community, and also the how to rectify if it is wrong is exceptionally helpful. So I just personally want to say a huge thank you for that. Any other questions or comments there? No. Okay, we've got a recommendation here that the Taupō East Rural Representative Group receives the overview provided on how addresses are issued. Could I have somebody move that?
Yep.
Oh,
yes.
Patty and John seconding. Thank you. Those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. We've now got the opportunity, if there's any items that anyone would like to add to next meeting. Are there any other agenda items that we'd like to put in? If there is something that, oh, sorry, go.
Sorry,
Patrick.
I was just interested to see how many replies, submissions we've had for the traffic management plan comes through. I was wondering if that's if we could get an update on that prior to its closing. That was all.
I think it has closed now, has it?
Has it closed? Or was it
Mid-May.
Mid-May?
Okay.
Yeah, just
if we could request that update, because I think I get where Patrick's coming from, is how many more can we add into the mix if we haven't got them there?
Yeah, I've certainly sent out a number of messages and things to the rural people. I'd just be interested to see how many general numbers we've had back. That was all.
Through the chair, and this is not an evidence-based number for you, but I believe it is around 200, that 150, 200 that we've received, but I can quickly check and find out. But we've had a really good response.
Excellent.
Cool. Thank you, Libby, and thank you for your work on that too, Patrick. Really appreciate that sharing of that information. I think it's really important, and lots of people like to be vocal after these things have happened, but now is our opportunity to try and affect some change there. So thank you for sharing that message. It's sincerely appreciated. If there is anything that anyone would like to add to the next meeting's agenda, while we do have agenda items to move things forward, it's also an opportunity for us to become better informed. So if there's something that is affecting the rural or the East community and we'd like to gather some more information, I think today's just been another example of how we can share information and become better informed to be able to help our communities moving forward. Just feel free to be in contact with Tracy or myself, and we can ensure that we try to get the best team around what's happening. We will defer what happens with issues that are raised to council to the next meeting, so that we're all aware of what the actual process is and how things are followed through. I think that's good information to have, and I think it gives people the opportunity to know what happens should they raise an issue with council, the actual channel and journey that information takes. So if there is something else that you'd like brought up, or if there is another issue, Paula, I'd suggest you're our eyes and ears in the Wairakei, village community. Just, if there are things coming up out there that we can help with or help to advocate for and things like that, please, this is an opportunity to share that information and for us to try and help there. So Libby's just messaged through, team, just checked, and we've received 193 submissions. So I think that's great. Look, if I don't think there's anything else there, this is a relatively short and brief meeting. I'd like to say thank you all very much for your time and commitment and for being here with us from many different places around the place. Your time is sincerely appreciated when there are many other things that you could be doing. So, yeah, thank you so much for being here and doing the great job that each of you do. Our next meeting is in June, if my recollection is correct. We don't need to worry about the field days this year, Patty, because they're not
15th of June, Kylie.
15th of June. Thanks
16th,
so much.
yeah.
16th, thanks. Thanks, Paula, that's outstanding. So we will get notification around that. Paula Farquhar, if you'd like to come into that one, we'd love to have you part of that. That would be fantastic. And I think for that one, we are going to try and join Evelyn on marae somewhere in our area. So that might be a little bit of an opportunity to perhaps have a little bit of a look around at some things that are going on in that part of the world. And I really appreciate Evelyn's kindness in extending an invitation to us to attend out there. I think that's really exciting. So I'm going to officially close the meeting and say thank you all very much for your time.
Well, just from me, Kylie, best wishes and the rest of your isolation.
Thank you. I'm hoping that we get some